Thor once killed someone without swinging Mjölnir, throwing a punch, or even starting a fight. He did it by asking questions, and the victim never realized he was in danger until it was already too late. This story begins with a dwarf named Alvíss. His name roughly means all-wise, and he believed he had earned that name. Alvíss was no ordinary dwarf. He claimed knowledge of the different beings and worlds of Norse mythology. He knew what humans call the things around them. He knew the names used by the gods, by giants, by elves, by dwarfs. He had knowledge that few beings could match. And one night, Alvíss arrived expecting something much greater than praise for his wisdom. He had come to collect a bride. Not just any bride, Thor's daughter. There was apparently already an agreement. Somehow, while Thor had been away, his daughter had been promised in marriage to Alvíss. And as far as the dwarf was concerned, the matter was settled. The preparations could begin. The bride would be his. There was only one problem. Thor had come home, and the god of thunder had absolutely no intention of letting Alviss simply walk away with his daughter. Normally, this is the part of a Thor story where someone reaches for a weapon, where Mjolnir begins to rise, where thunder shakes the sky. But this time, Thor had a much crueler idea, because Alvíss had arrived during the night. And Thor knew something the dwarf apparently wasn't thinking about. The sun would eventually rise. Imagine arriving to collect your bride and discovering that her father is Thor. That was the situation Alvíss now faced. When Thor saw the strange visitor, he immediately began questioning him, and he wasn't exactly welcoming. Thor mocked Alviss's appearance. The dwarf looked pale, unnatural, like someone who belonged underground rather than among the gods. Thor even suggested that he looked more like some strange creature of the giants than a respectable husband. But Alvíss wasn't intimidated. He introduced himself proudly. He explained that he lived beneath the earth, under stone, exactly where a dwarf belonged. Then he made his purpose clear. He had come for the woman who had been promised to him. A deal had been made. And according to Alvíss, a promise should be honored. There was confidence in that statement, because Alvíss seemed to believe the agreement protected him. Thor couldn't simply pretend it had never happened. But Thor had an answer. He told Alvíss that there had been one major problem with the arrangement. Thor hadn't been there when it was made, and as the girl's father, Thor claimed the authority to decide whether the marriage would happen. The surviving poem simply calls the bride Thor's daughter. She is often associated with Thrúdr or Thrúd, Thor's known daughter, but the poem itself never actually names her. And strangely, she barely matters to the conversation that follows. Because this quickly stops being a story about marriage. It becomes a battle between two men. Not a battle of strength, a battle of patience. And Alvíss had no idea that the clock was already ticking. Thor could smash giants with a hammer, so why waste an entire night arguing with one dwarf? That's exactly what makes this story so unusual. Thor is rarely remembered as the clever god. Odin seeks secret knowledge. Loki survives through deception. Thor solves many of his problems with overwhelming force. If a giant threatens Asgard, Mjölnir usually handles the negotiation. But Alvíss presented a different problem. He wasn't attacking Thor. He hadn't broken into Asgard with an army. He wasn't challenging the thunder god to combat. He was claiming that a legitimate promise had been made. Simply crushing him might solve the immediate problem. But Thor found another way. a way that would allow Alvíss to destroy himself. Thor suddenly changed his attitude. Maybe, just maybe, Alvíss could marry his daughter. But first, Thor needed proof. After all, the dwarf called himself All-Wise. That was a dangerous name to carry in front of a god. So Thor offered him a challenge. If Alvíss could answer everything Thor wanted to know, if he could prove that his legendary wisdom was genuine, Thor would allow him to win the bride. To Alvíss, this must have sounded perfect. Thor wasn't asking him to wrestle. He wasn't asking him to lift Mjölnir. He wasn't challenging him to survive lightning. Thor was challenging him at the one thing Alvíss believed he could never lose: knowledge. And that was exactly why the trap worked. Thor hadn't attacked Alviss's weakness. He attacked his pride. If you're enjoying these strange stories from Norse mythology, hit like and subscribe, because there are plenty more myths that get even darker than this one. What do you ask a dwarf who claims to know everything? Thor started with the world itself. What was the earth called among humans? Among the gods? Among giants? Amongst elves? Alvíss answered immediately. Then Thor asked about the heavens. Again, the dwarf knew every answer. The moon, the sun, the clouds, the wind. Each time, Alvíss explained how different beings had different names for the same things. And with every correct answer, his confidence grew. As far as Alvíss was concerned, this was going perfectly. Thor had challenged him at the one thing he was famous for, and Alvíss was proving that the name All-Wise was deserved. But Thor wasn't really interested in the answers. He was interested in something else, keeping Alvíss talking, because while the dwarf proudly demonstrated his knowledge, the night was slowly disappearing. The craziest part is that Alvíss practically warned Thor how to kill him. One of Thor's questions concerned the sun. Alvíss explained that humans, gods, giants, elves, and dwarfs all had different names for it. And among the dwarfs, the sun carried a dangerous meaning, because creatures associated with the underground were not meant to be caught outside in daylight. Alvíss knew this. He understood exactly what sunrise could mean for someone like him, and yet he kept answering. Thor asked about the sea, fire, forests, night. Again and again, Alvíss had the answer, but every answer cost him something he wasn't paying attention to: time. Thor didn't need to defeat the dwarf in a battle. He only needed to make sure Alvíss remained in the hall until morning, and Alviss's pride was doing all the work for him. Alvíss answered almost everything correctly, and still completely lost. The questions continued deep into the night. Alvíss never gave up. Why would he? Every answer made him believe he was getting closer to Thor's daughter. He thought he was winning. Eventually, Thor admitted that the dwarf's knowledge was extraordinary. For a moment, Alvíss may have believed the challenge was finally over, that he had proven himself, that the marriage would happen. But then Thor revealed the truth. The questions had never really been about testing his wisdom. Thor had deliberately kept him talking, and while Alvíss had been showing off everything he knew, dawn had arrived. The first light of the sun was entering the hall. Only then did Alvíss understand what Thor had done. The test hadn't been a path to marriage. It had been a trap. Thor's deadliest weapon that night wasn't his hammer. It was sunrise. The surviving poem ends almost immediately after Thor reveals the deception. Day has arrived. Sunlight reaches Alvíss, and the traditional interpretation is that the dwarf is turned to stone. No battle, no lightning, no swing of Mjölnir. Thor had defeated him entirely through patience and deception. And that's what makes the story so unusual. Alvíss really was incredibly knowledgeable. He knew the names used by humans, gods, giants, elves, and dwarfs. He even understood the danger of the sun, but all that knowledge couldn't save him from his own pride. Thor understood that Alvíss would never want to walk away from a challenge designed to prove how intelligent he was, so he gave him exactly what he wanted. Question after question, until there was no darkness left. The dwarf called All-Wise knew almost everything about the world around him. But he failed to notice the one thing that actually mattered. The sun was coming up, and Thor killed him, without ever needing Mjolnir.